much more helpful to actually prepare us to how to be human, how to actually thrive in this world.
And here's the opportunity. Stories can be inherited too. And a lot of times we're breaking generational curses and generational traumas and generational bonds that we don't want anymore with story work. And we can do the same thing when it comes to how we're living our lives otherwise as well.
Welcome to the Embrace and Expand podcast, where we talk about everything from spirituality, self-development, relationships, mindfulness, wellness, and everything that will help you embrace all that you are so you can expand into the best version of yourself. All right, hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Embrace and Expand podcast. So on today's podcast, we have a guest I was recently introduced to. He is a master story worker and healthy holistic habits coach, helping people to overcome imposter syndrome, turn self-doubt into self-confidence, and finally face what's really holding you back, yourself. He has long possessed a deep passion for optimization and self-improvement. He has been guiding clients and friends on their own personal development journey for well over a decade. So let me introduce you to the man behind Work Your Stories and co-host of the Get Enlifted Podcast, Dave Robinson. Dave, welcome to the Embrace and Expand podcast.
Thank you, Adam. Really appreciate you having me on. Thank you for the intro, and I'm excited to be here and have a, what did you call it, Flowcast?
Flowcast, exactly.
Beautiful. Let's do it. I'm excited.
For those of the listeners that aren't familiar with your work and are maybe wondering, like, what does Work Your Stories mean? Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what got you here?
So Work Your Stories is all about focusing on our words and the stories we tell ourselves, and figuring out whether those stories are what we actually want to be telling ourselves on a regular basis or not. And ultimately, it's up to us to decide how we view the things we've experienced in the past. And there's great power and opportunity in moving through and examining those past experiences or areas in which we feel stuck or hurt, things of that nature. And really, again, working the story, moving through the story in a particular specific way that allows us to move that emotion and optimize what we want to have happen moving forward. And so I've got a long background in fitness and in health, both professionally as well as practiced, more practiced than professionally. I've been a full-time coach for the past 6 years, 6 years. Before that, I was a financial planner. Before that, I was a D1 strength coach for a year. And so I've had a lot of different opportunities, and actually went to school to be a high school history teacher. So I knew I always wanted to coach or teach or advise in some capacity. And it wasn't until I found first fitness and then healthy habits coaching, and then finally story work through Enlifted that I really found my calling and my passions. It's really interesting kind of weaving stories in together. My other great passion right now, and where I view the next large iterations of time in my life to go, is into homesteading and permaculture and building out like sustainable agriculture techniques on a personal property here in town, where we've got a third of an acre, 10 minutes outside of my hometown of Richmond, Virginia. To really, big backyard, but small space ultimately. And, ultimately the goal is to get a 100+ acre homestead out in the mountains of Virginia somewhere that we can turn into a retreat center and practice a lot of these techniques and kind of combine in all my various interests and passions of being in nature and really good food and coaching and story work and all these things together. So that's shortish, longish version of kind of where I've been and how I got to what I'm doing now and where the future is going as well. So we got past, present, future. How's that?
That's such a fantastic story. And I really love at how multifaceted it shows that you are, and that we don't always have to be so married to one specific way, but can allow our interests to really guide us in how we want to implement everything. And even from, like, I resonate a lot with what you say because my wife and I have that same dream of getting a piece of property, turning it into a self-sustaining retreat space where we also implement permaculture and just being able to create a little Eden, if you will. Having a space where people can come to and truly connect with nature and show that we're not separate. We are truly, fully, 100% interconnected with this world that we are around. So let's kind of dive into that a little bit. Like how I've been watching your Instagram and seeing some of the work that you've been doing on your property and the homesteading and creating the garden. Like how have you noticed that shift as you've put more of your hands into the dirt and started animal husbandry and things like that? Like, how has that really changed the way that you outlook coaching and helping people?
Well, the short answer is I've really started to realize how much of a process both those things are. Just getting started in any new thing obviously is a process, but then moving through the journey of learning and understanding and becoming more comfortable. And, I apply that process with my clients in story work and in, healthy holistic habit coaching, and I can see it in the garden as well. It's really interesting. I got into, I've always been an outdoors person, right? I've always loved, playing in the woods when I was a kid and playing in the creek when I was a kid and, going fishing and just running around. And then as an adult, got into obstacle course racing, like Spartan racing, because it sends you off up and down a mountain somewhere, with a bunch of other stuff included. So I'm like, oh, hell yeah, I'm all for this, right? And what got me into gardening was in early 2020, I ended up moving to Mexico to open a health and wellness retreat with a former business partner. And it was on the Yucatan Peninsula, which is the eastern side of Mexico, about like maybe 10 miles north of Belize, 15 miles north of Belize, 6 hours south of Cancun. Just a pristine, perfect little place. It's a little town of like 1,500 people, chickens running around everywhere and dogs running around everywhere. And I was playing barefoot soccer with the Niños, man. I was in it, and we ended up putting a down payment on a little compound down there and moving in. And, I moved to Mexico on March 2nd of 2020. And then obviously COVID happened. Right. And so, had to move back, decided to move back 2.5 weeks later. And that's ultimately what got me into story work, but it's also like what got me into gardening, because I got reconnected with a woman who was a professional acquaintance before. We had just known each other through networking, and we, long story short, fell in love. And she's got a house here in Lakeside, and so I started with 2 little planter beds that she had, so I was helping her with her garden, and eventually a year and a half later moved in, and we were able to start to transform this place together, which has been really, really amazing. And as our relationship has progressed and grown and matured, so has the garden, which has been super cool. And we've now, over the past 6 months to a year, been able to put more kind of transition from doing a lot of annual vegetables and kind of that traditional tomatoes and cucumbers and lettuce, which we're still doing, and that's amazing, but adding in more perennial plants, like a ton more perennial plants, adding in a ton of cut flowers, really going for learning about cover crops and going for things that work synergistically with one another, that work well in our area, and learning by trial and error and a lot of podcasts and otherwise, and so we've been able to add rabbits to our homestead. We're adding quail here shortly. I've got 3 beehives that are all like half to a third of the way set up. So there's a ton of little projects all over the place, but it is such a fun process. And that's what I'm going to return back to in this, is the process of learning and doing and engaging and being okay with failing because you're learning, and et cetera, et cetera. So.
I love that you touched on that, being okay with failing. That's something that I personally have struggled with a lot throughout my life, just because I received the childhood conditioning of everything needs to be perfect. And if you're not doing it perfect, you're not doing it right. And if you're not doing it right, then why are you doing it? And that has stopped me from doing a lot of things over the years, because it's had that mentality of, well, if I don't know how to do it perfect the first time, then I just won't do it. And the reality is we don't learn how to do something well unless we fail, unless we learn the ways that don't work in order to find the ways that do work.
You're 100% right, man. And what's so funny about this is it all comes back to stories, because the story that I had told myself is that, my parents were largely okay with good enough. It's good enough, all good, right? And, not that they certainly worked their asses off, and, they did their best to instill that in me, and I'm still a rebel to the core, and always have been, have multifaceted interests and things of that nature, and didn't really ever fit in with the box, so to speak, from, a growing up perspective. And so my story has been, and was very strong before I got in and worked it, that, I've been good enough is good enough, and it's fine. It's good enough, right? So what that allowed me to do is go and take chances and fail a lot, and also I allowed myself to not try 100% and not see things all the way through, and not, go completely all in various aspects until I learned how to do that. Right. So, but failing is the key, honestly, because ultimately we're not going to be good at things when we start, and most of the time anyway. And if you are great, do more of that, especially if you love it. But, we have to learn how to have a white belt mentality, so to speak, and be beginners.
Yeah, it makes me think of that kind of philosophy of forever the student. Like always being in the process of learning, and always being open to see a different way of doing things. Even if you've done something the same way for decades, but then somebody shows you a slightly more efficient way, or helps, like you said, restructure that story a little bit, so that you can start to take a different perspective and realize that, oh, wow, there actually are a tremendous amount of ways to accomplish just about anything. Some are going to, of course, work better than others, but the only way that we learn how to do that is through that trial and error process.
And it's important that people realize that there's no such thing as an unrealistic goal or dream, just maybe an unrealistic timeline, right? And, if we allow expectations to fall away, and if we allow the desire and need to have things now, which I'm totally guilty of, and I've made mistakes in the past because of that, right? But ultimately, again, learning from those quote unquote failures or mistakes and times where I was wrong, or maybe viewed things differently, or just maybe not. Maybe if I had the same information, or I would do it the same, who knows, but having opportunities to grow is what helps move us forward, and understanding that the wins are coming. They're already here. More will come, right? If I get caught up about where I said by the beginning of 2023 I was going to have this homestead, and now I'm not, and it just turns into this snowball, right? So I think goals are great. I think we should really go get what we want in life, and understanding that the timeline often is the main key, that we overestimate what we can do in a short time frame and underestimate what we can do in a longer one. I love that concept. I play with that concept a lot. I do a lot of long-term vision casting, and that allows me to be okay when things don't work out in the short term, so to speak.
So Dave, would you say that is one of the foundational parts of working with somebody's story, is to see that dream that's there, but recognize that it's really the timing of that dream that maybe needs some verbiage shift around, so that it makes it easier is the word that's coming up, but I don't necessarily feel like that's the correct word, but will really help that to actually come to fruition?
That's a great question. I think that's a key component for a lot of people. It's oftentimes people have things in their way before they can even really start to think about going after their dreams in a real, honest, earnest manner. And a lot of people have stuckness. A lot of people have hurt. A lot of people have unfortunately been through haunted experiences that really shape how they view certain experiences or how they view their life, or the stories they're telling themselves, their self-talk, their self-image, etc. And so what I've found for myself personally and with almost all of my clients is that once we can remove a couple, a number, a bunch of the old key stuck, hurt, haunted stories, then that gives us tremendous amount of space to then have as a new foundation and platform to start to address the day-to-day self-talk and then build what we actually want to create. And that gives people the courage to a lot of times leave jobs, leave relationships that aren't serving them or are toxic or whatever it may be, and go after what they want. And I'm a huge proponent of that for people, even if it's scary or risky or whatever it may be. And there's a lot of steps we can do to mitigate that risk, right? But ultimately, what I want is for people to be fulfilled and happy and content, and understand that in order to get there, it's an equal balance of working their own personal stories and then optimizing their health and their habits that do both of those things. And they both work together. They both work in concert with one another. It's health matters most, quite frankly. And ultimately, from there, we can start to work on the stories. So oftentimes, though, 90% of the time, I'm starting with stories.
Mm. Yeah, as you were saying that, it made me think of the question of, do you find that when somebody can correct the stories or patterns that they are repeating, loops in their subconscious, that almost has a very physical effect on the body, and you start to see, even without maybe any habit changes physically, that people start to notice that maybe they have more energy, or maybe their body just feels better, or they have this like lightness, because all of a sudden they're now seeing these stories that were most likely very negative or self-defeating that now are empowering and uplifting.
Absolutely. And most of the time it's because what we're able to do is help people obtain that rest and relax, rest and digest, feed and breed parasympathetic nervous system state, right? Which is very hard to obtain if we're breathing mechanics, or if our breathing patterns and mechanics are poor, or if we're stressed out to begin with. And if we've got a running loop or a mental image loop, or before you go to bed, you hit the pillow and then that thing pops up, or, just the whatever it may be that keeps us in that fight or flight, right? And so anytime we can reduce stress, I mean, that's a huge part of healthy holistic habits, right? It's sunlight, it's feet in the grass, it's good hydrating water, it's more minerals, it's real food, it's reduce the inflammation, which is AKA reduce the stress. And so, ultimately, this is like reducing the mental emotional stress that allows us to, as you said, kind of let go, feel that lightness, have the aches and pains kind of go away. I notice that personally when I'm stressed about money and money issues, or, budget comes up, or, I've noticed it. We had our dishwasher, washing machine, and hot water heater all go out in about a 3-month time frame. So, it's like when things like that start to happen, I notice my back start to tighten up a little bit more, and I start to notice my hips a little bit tighter, and I start to carry a lot of that stress in that, and so again, it's just being aware and realizing how these things affect us, and ultimately how stress affects us on a chronic level versus an acute level where it can actually be very helpful.
Yeah. And that chronic level, I think, is a really important indicator of where, and for some people that may have come from maybe they injured themselves at one point in time, and correlate that injury to what's creating the chronic pain, not realizing that it's the story that they received from that injury that is actually perpetuating that chronic pain.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you an example. So in college, I fell in love with powerlifting I've been a soccer player my whole life. I still identify as a soccer player. It's the beautiful game. I'm watching Man City, Real Madrid Champions League semifinals at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today. It's on my calendar, right? Huge Chelsea fan. But with, damn it, I got all hopped up about soccer and lost my train of thought. What were we just talking about? Pull me back. Pull me back off this rant and tangent.
We were talking about how people can correlate an injury to what caused the chronic pain, but it's actually the story they received from that injury.
Yes. Thank you. Got me right back in. So, college, random roommate freshman year is a 6-time national junior powerlifting champion, right? And so fell in love with powerlifting, got really strong and pretty big, and that ultimately got me the job at a D1 strength and conditioning room. And that was my passion. That was like a 5-year all in, right, of this learning and really my entry point into personal development through fitness and through nutrition, right? And I carried the identity of a strength athlete through that time, even while I was doing obstacle course racing, through my financial planning days, through my as I left that to open, a outdoor health business and, group workout business and stuff like that. And I carried what I also carried was a ton of adrenal stress and a ton of fatigue and a ton of extra strain and a ton of extra weight and a ton of inflammation and a ton of stories surrounding what would happen if I lost this muscle and if I wasn't a strength athlete anymore, and that I'll always be able to be in the 1,000-pound club. I'll be in the 1,000-pound club till I die at 100, I'll always lift. And then I have this back injury because I overstrain myself, and it's my first major injury. I've broken wrist and collarbone and sprained a million ankles and had this, that, and the other here and there. But this was the first one where it was oh, wow, my physical movement is completely taken away from me. I can't pick up a pencil off the floor. I can barely walk, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't have the experience nor really sought or asked for help for the guidance to figure out how I should return from this. And I experienced a setback in that injury about 4 months later because I came back too hard, too quick. And ultimately I decided to just drop all physical activity for about 6 months. And it was this kind of dark night of the soul time frame. This is middle of 2019. I have a very tumultuous end with a business partner relationship. I have a tumultuous end with a romantic relationship, and out in the middle of nowhere on a camping trip. Real oh shit, now what do I do type stuff, right? And I had a conscious moment. I basically went on a 2-week solo road trip out in Nevada and Utah and Colorado, which was great. And I realized I had to let go of the story and the identity of being a strength athlete in order for me to actually heal my back and move forward, and that was okay. And that ultimately was a big, long process, but through actually addressing it and through really focusing on walking in steps versus running miles and banging weights, I was able to largely overcome that. And I've had a couple minor 2 or 3 or 4 out of 10 setbacks since then, but it's been mostly great, right? But there was a real visceral when I've finally accepted and made that decision that it was okay for me to just let go in general, really, of the old identities and the old, pain and hurt and trauma and, whatever it was, just let go. And removing that story removed a lot of that physical stress and emotional stress. And that was another layer to removing those things and getting to a more whole and optimized individual person. Feeling more like me, right? Becoming more real and more authentic and more me. So,
yeah. I love hearing stories like that, especially when it really revolves around that being okay with having to let go of that old self in order to become that new version of you that wants to show up within the world.
Are you open to the hedgehog concept by any chance? Have you heard of
No,
this?
no, I'm down to hear about it
So
though.
this is by the guy who wrote Good to Great, which is a fantastic book on really big businesses, like your Apples and stuff like that, Wells Fargo's, things of that nature. But he has this concept in here, and I've heard about this a couple years ago and applied it to my own personal life, whereas he applies it to big businesses. I invite you to apply this to your personal and professional life and see how it fits. I like this a lot. So think of the Venn diagram, right? And there's the three intersecting points. You have to have all three of these things intersect in order to be this quote unquote hedgehog, right? Ultimately, the professional thing that you do, this thing, your career, vocation, or whatever, it has to be one, something that you love to do, would do for free, right? Not something that you're just merely good at or that you like or whatever, right? Two, it has to drive your economic engine or fill your economic reservoir, right? So you either got to make the money you need to make to run your life, or you got to, make enough money to do what you need to do, right? And three, and the key component to this, is it has to be something that you feel you were born for, created for, or could one day be the best in the world at. And for me, I didn't love financial planning. I loved personal training and coaching, but I was never going to be the best in the world at it. I can name 50 coaches off the top of my head that are way better than me, and that's okay, right? And then wait till I research, and there's a billion more, and so now what? And nor did either of those things really fill my economic reservoir in a manner in which I was able to spend the time doing the other things that I really love to do, right? Now, story work, I love it and love it. Love working people's stories and helping them find these breakthroughs and free themselves from this stuck, static, right? I love it. So much so that I sometimes do it for free, right? And I will do it for the rest of my life, no matter what. It does fill my economic reservoir and drive my economic engine. And based on a number of factors, I really do believe and feel that I was born for this, created for this, and I'm going to keep doing it. And I'm going down as one of the best to ever do it. That's a personal goal of mine. It's written on my board over there, right? And so that's just based on reps and the desire for me to want to do this and the great passion I have for it. And so I tell folks that this is my hedgehog, and if that helps people create and hone into the vision of what they have for themselves, then fantastic, right? And as time goes on, that really perfect vision of how everything is going to shift together, how that hedgehog shifts might be on the homestead, as a retreat center, or as, in-person story work, yada, yada, who knows, right? But I know that piece helped me to focus in on the thing that I love, that I'm good at, that's making me money, and ultimately allow other things to kind of shed off and fall by the wayside, especially if I just kind of liked it or just was like sort of good at it, or like, yeah, I could do that, but right. So now I'm very intentional about when I choose to partake in things that aren't my backyard and story work sessions and working out with my boys and hanging out with my partner, Ruslana. Like, other than that, I got to be really choosy, and if it doesn't fall in line with those things or that ultimate big vision, then I've been okay with, again, falling back on this theme, letting it go.
What a fantastic metric to be able to judge everything that you do by is, does it make you fall in love with it every single time you come back to it, even if some time goes by? And that was the thing that I had to accept about my home theater work, was that just because I was good at it, I didn't love it. Like, yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the, financial compensation that it gave me, but I didn't truly love it. Like, I don't know many people that love crawling through crawl spaces and attics with like insulation and all of that stuff just to give somebody a nicer sound system and a bigger TV. Like, at the end of the day, it didn't, like I previously said, fulfill me on that soul level. Whereas like doing this podcast, doing the transformational coaching and breath work that I do, like, just like you, I've done so many sessions for free because I just knew somebody maybe didn't have the financial means necessary to participate and would have not if it all came down to money. So you know what? I'm going to pay it forward and help you change the things that you need to change so that that sends the ripples out into the world. And that's going to magnetize the people who can financially afford it back to me or to you, because now you're sharing your voice, doing what you feel that you love to do and lights you up every single day.
Adam, I love that, man. My personal definition of impact is the ripples we create and send out into our world, right? And so you absolutely nailed it, man. And if we love it, if we love to do something, then it's more, in my mind, it's more or less okay to do it for free under the right conditions and under the right parameters. Like, it's got to feel good, and for me, and I kind of joke about this because it's a little forward, but it's like, if you got it and don't want to pay it, then not gonna get it for free, right? But if you don't have it and you really need it and it feels good, then I would love to help you out. I love to do it, right? And I often do. And ultimately, that's that pay it forward thing. And I just got a um, email about a week ago. I need to get back to this guy, but it was a referral from a friend of mine. He was like, "Hey, man, a really respected coach sent me one of his good friends," and he was like, I don't know, I'm too close to him, but I know you could help him. I don't think his situation's great. I just love for you to just like have a conversation with him if you would, right? And the situation felt good for me to be like, yeah, dude, I'd love to do a 3-pack with you, like on me, no problem. And uh, we were able to work through some haunted stuff from his time in the military and his combat tours and things of that nature. And he sent me a message. It's been about 6 months. And, he's like, man, I'm doing so great. I bought a house, like things are moving forward. I'm like feeling like I'm over a lot of this stuff. I've been able to get a lot of my physical mobility back. And it's so freaking cool to hear, and it's like, that's why I'm doing this rather, versus a host of other things. Because having your own business isn't easy. It's super fulfilling and it's really amazing, but it's very hard in many, many ways. And, we can leave that there or talk about that if you want, but ultimately there's the ways when we are able to pay it forward via paid sessions or otherwise, or, holding doors open for old ladies, or, giving away extra food, like whatever it is, those are all huge wins because they do ripple. And then we're expanding our own frequencies and that of those around us. And that's how we actually change the world, like literally. So I'm all in.
Yeah. Yeah. And the fact that you touched on at how seeing that guy make so many drastic changes based upon you giving your time and your expertise for free financially still filled your energetic cup. And I look at money as just another form of energy. Like, time is energy, physical exertion is energy, money is energy. And so if somebody doesn't have the money, but seeing them blossom, seeing them thrive in their life based upon something that I could offer them, that fills me up too.
I agree. And if I believe karma is real in some capacity, right? And the right and the wrong and the good and the bad. And I don't know whether there's like a running tally, whether this is Santa up there, on the nice and naughty list or anything like that. But also, I believe in money karma as well, and the more good money karma I put out there, the more it's going to come around. Like, it's whatever. And I'm definitely not banking. I'll tell you that right now. And it's totally great. And I'm just, again, I'm not in any way, shape, or form worried about it because I'm not hurting either, And so just understanding that the more is more mentality is very oftentimes detrimental, whether that's miles or money or, um, you know, likes on Instagram or, followers or whatever it is, like whatever it is. I've kind of toned it down a little bit, pulled it back a bit, and found a lot more calmness, fulfillment, peace, joy, happiness, etc. Life satisfaction factor is very high. So,
Yeah, it's like having that gratitude for what you have, right? And what's actually
it's
working
huge.
for you in the time, not trying to continue to perpetuate this thought of like, well, once I get the money or once I get the house or once I get the car or once I get the relationship, then I'll be grateful, then I'll be fulfilled. But by taking that stance of not having gratitude for what you already have is going to always perpetuate that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the gratitude is massive. And gosh, I know it's cliche and I really pushed against it for a long time, but there is a ton of power in being grateful, especially when you're in a poor mood, or in a mental funk, right? Altruism, kindness towards others, and understanding things aren't always as they appear, and just being grateful is huge, huge when in a good mood or a bad mood, quite frankly, and
Yeah.
being okay with both of those. Yeah.
Well, Dave, I would love to ask you the embrace and expand signature question of what did you have to embrace in your life in order to expand into the person that you are today?
I thought about this a couple times during the show, just briefly, and I changed my mind 3 times, but I'm back to my original, which means it was the right one. Since I've contemplated various options and come back to this. Go all the way. Go all the way. There's an incredible Charles Bukowski poem. If you're going to try, go all the way. Otherwise, don't even start. It goes on and on and on. And ultimately, for me, like that decision to go all in on my dreams, on my life, on away from things that were comfortable and good, you know, the job, the girl, the really nice, pretty house downtown, like all the stuff that on the outside looked really great, but on the inside it wasn't for me. And going all the way has completely changed my life and allowed me to embrace and expand and become the person who I am today. And that's ultimately the mantra, one of my main key life phrases that allows me to, lean into all of the hell yeses in my life and lean into, the things that I really, truly, truly want to do. And I don't always get it right. Like I lose time on sucking, scrolling on Instagram. It sucks time away from me. And, like I'm not the most productive person in the world, right? But I focus on my health and I focus on my family and my good habits and my time and having fun and helping other people. And, on the big things, like I go all the way. And that helps tremendously and has really helped shape me as a person.
And that just goes to show at how much work you've done around changing your story, just like you touched on at the beginning of the podcast.
Yeah, for sure, man. For sure.
Changing that good enough story to going all the way.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Way to bring it full circle on that. Yeah. And for sure, like where all of us have come from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we're all different people, right? And hopefully in a good way. And I think the more intentional you are and the more you kind of like build and stack these things. And when you get the right tech, especially the right language tech, and when you understand that it's, again, not about the miles and the weights, and it's more about like time outside, shirt off, feet in grass, that ultimately helps the most. Gotta learn some things along the way, but gosh, it's such a huge difference. And then responding to stress, the bounce back when unfortunate things do occur, it's so much quicker and so much more graceful, less abrasive, so I'm I'm excited for that wedge to open up even further, and then the stressful things happens, and I'm just like totally chilling, and it doesn't even get me at all. And I don't even have to say I'm sorry or anything like that, you know. But more growth to come, and I'm, you know, again, I love the process of that. So
Yeah. And it's beautiful when that can happen and you start to recognize at how far you have come. I had a
yep.
moment like that yesterday. I was sitting in the Las Vegas airport flying back from Washington State, surprising my mom for Mother's Day. And
Good for you, by the
normally
way.
when
Good for
I've,
you.
thank you, thank you. Yeah. Life is
Yeah.
short. You got to do those things.
Amen. You
And
have to, man. So good on.
And normally in the past, like when I travel, I get super stressed out. As a highly sensitive person, I tune into the energies in the environment. And if you've ever been through a big airport, everyone is stressed out. Everyone is worried about making their flight on time. Everybody's worried about being at the right gate or missing their flight because they've randomly changed the gate at the last minute. And I recognized in a moment, and I actually made a reel about this, as I was sitting in my seat surrounded by a bunch of people, lines everywhere. You know, if you've been to the Vegas airport, there's slot machines everywhere. So there's all kinds of noise. And I was super chill. None of it bothered me. I was just in the moment, accepting it for what I was. I had a 3-hour layover that turned into a 5-hour layover, and I didn't end up getting back home until 3 a.m. in the morning when it was supposed to be like midnight. And still, even that didn't change my state of being. And it was a good indicator of the work that is being done is actually making a difference. Even though it's taken, I mean, I've been doing this self-development journey on my own for like almost 15 years at this point in time. It's taken a long time to get here, but that's not really the point. It doesn't matter how long it takes us to get there, as long as we can recognize those slight shifts that are starting to happen. I'm not repeating that pattern that I used to. I'm not playing back
Exactly.
that story that I once told myself.
I see it as these beautiful upward spirals, right? And so it's like, yeah, we may be kind of like back down a little bit, but we're also going to come back up a little bit, and you can see down into this space of who you were and where you are, and you know, and you can also kind of see up, but it's kind of narrow and you can't really see it, but you can sort of see it, like as far as where you're going. And I don't know, it's a cool visual. And I only have one tattoo. I got it when I was 18. It's on my side, and I don't know whether I'm gonna get any others. But if I could like visualize that in a tattoo, I might think about it. But who knows? Who knows? One day.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's totally a beautiful concept, and actually the second time that's come up in the podcast, and
Really?
it's something that the first time I heard it, I locked that into my mind because it's such a beautiful way to think about moving up this spiral and recognizing that it's okay if you slide back down the spiral. But as you slide back down the spiral, those moments in time that it takes you to go from recognizing that, oh shit, I slid back down the spiral again, to getting back to where you were, continues to get shorter and shorter and shorter.
Yeah. And ultimately, you know, if you've ever ridden a bike downhill, you know, and then it goes up into the next hill, like, you know that you're gaining momentum as you're heading down, and then you got enough momentum to get up and over the hill again, you know. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of ways to look at that, and I love that. There's a Sanskrit term for it, and it's like an upward spiral that ends in something, and I'll remember it in like an hour. And totally helpful for this show, but yeah.
The challenge when the hard drive starts to get full, right, is figuring out how to always grab those pieces that you need right in the moment.
Man, it's so funny. I had a when I was a kid, when I was in school, I had a like high school. I remember having a pretty photographic memory from the point where, like, if I stared at a page long enough before a test, in the test, I could like recall the page in my head and just like find on the page where that answer was, and then read the answer from the page in my head. But I wasn't like, I didn't know it. You know, I wasn't even like recalling it or like pulling it from a file. It was just like on the page that I had just burned into my eyes. Right. And so uh, I don't know. It's that skill's there. We can pluck it out, but when the hardware gets overloaded, it can happen. So
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's what I think trying to, like you use in your story work of the soft talk, like you touched on, trying to remove some of those limiting words out of that hard drive actually frees up some of that space that then can shift those patterns, shift the programming, and all of a sudden now you see your life showing up in a completely different way. You're talking completely different. How you structure sentences are completely different. And that changes the emotional response based upon what you're saying.
it's literally, Adam, like hitting eject and having the CD come out, and then you take a new CD and I'm just doing this because we're millennials, right? Taking a new CD and putting it in the thing and pushing it in, and it goes into the computer, and it's like, and you get the little twirly button and hourglass, and then hey, ta-da! Now you got a new program, and that new program eliminates a lot of the negations and the things that we don't want in our language, because the English language is full of talking about what we don't actually want to have happen. Hey, I don't want to get wet. It's raining. I don't want to get wet. Well, actually, what I want to have happen is I want to stay dry, is the ultimate outcome of this, right? But we're focusing on don't get wet. Silly example, but you get it, right? But negations, projections, soft talk, as you mentioned, we're filled with these patterns of speech and language that we inherited and that we just learned either in school or from parents or peers or otherwise, that largely don't serve us and help us, keep us in conflict. Actually goes beyond not helping us. They actually keep us in conflict and create conflict internally and externally, right? Whereas there's actually a different pattern of speech, really the opposite pattern of speech for many of those, that help to architect the reality that we want in our lives and to focus on what we actually want moving forward, internally, externally, and otherwise. And so, part of story work, part of Work Your Stories, part of my coaching practice is to help teach people the right language program to help them to use more architect language and use less conflict language, while also removing a lot of the stuck stuff and the hurt stuff and doing more forward focused goal setting, vision casting, ideal life, hedgehog, fun things to help people actually do what they really want to do in their lives. But it comes down to words. It comes down to words, breath, stories, and habits. So
Yeah, one of my favorite sayings that I tell my clients is that there's a reason it's called spelling. You cast spells with your words. And so that's why we have to be very mindful of the
yep.
words that we choose to use, because if we're not mindful of those words, we may be casting spells on ourselves that we don't actually want to be casting.
Yes. And the definition of a spell is a word or collection of words of great influence, right? A word or collection of words of great influence. And so you're absolutely right. When we speak, we are casting spells of great influence, like magic, abracadabra with my word I create. So, we can get woo-woo, and a lot of times it's not woo-woo to understand that our thoughts affect our reality. That's basic life sciences.
Yeah.
I think. I don't know. I wish we learned that in like second grade. Wouldn't that be helpful? But
Oh, there are so many things I wish we would have learned on an early age that would have been so much more helpful to actually prepare us to how to be human, how to actually thrive in this world.
And here's the opportunity part. Stories can be inherited too, and a lot of times we're breaking generational curses and generational traumas and generational bonds that we don't want anymore with story work, and we can do the same thing when it comes to how we're living our lives otherwise as well. We can completely shift how we're raising our children. We can completely shift what we're teaching them. We can completely shift the narrative about how to, at least in your own personal space and bubble, how to live a life and how to live a good life and a satisfactory, helpful, impactful, fulfilled life. And the more people that are doing it in their bubbles, eventually our ripples start to hit one another, and ultimately, whether you consider yourself an influencer or not, right? And I don't take on that identity, but I do realize I influence in both positively and negatively in more ways than I can even imagine. And so, being aware of that influence and realizing we all have that influence, some with platforms greater than others, we can influence the outcome of the future for ourselves and others by how we act today. And the more good and the more help and the more impact we have for things that help us and our families and our friends and our communities, the better. We're all capable of it too. I love that you and your wife are looking for that homestead as well. And, that was part of what took Ruslana and I so long to like really get started. Was like, well, we don't really want to be here, but, we had always said, we're not going to sell this place. We're not going to sell the house, and ultimately we're going to go into another spot somewhere down the road. And why not save for that and learn here, And so, I became okay with putting time and energies and efforts into the property that we have now, because we're able to grow and build for the future, so do what you can now with what you have and learn along the way.
Such an important lesson of like not waiting until the perfect opportunity presents itself to actually start doing the thing that you want to do, but to recognize that just do the thing you want to do. And that right opportunity may present itself because you're actually doing the thing you want to do.
Put yourself in the arena. Just start, right? The key factors in success: start and keep going. That's pretty much it, right? Right? But you got to start. You got the arena, and things will fall off or whatever, or keep going. But ultimately, if you really want something, you'll keep doing it. And so that's another fantastic quote I love is, if you didn't get what you want, you either tried to negotiate the price or you didn't really want it in the first place. And so a lot of times that's been the case. So I've really didn't really want that thing, or I thought I wanted that thing, but it was really on the way to this other thing up there that I wanted, or over there that I wanted. Or I tried to negotiate the price of the thing, actually getting the thing, and that's why it didn't work. So, I'd encourage you, man, to full send and go all the way, and don't worry about it's got to be perfect or it's got to be right. We'll combine a little bit of that, and we'll have like the perfect amount of screw it, I'll just do it, and oh yeah, it's gonna be really good, and combine it in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, this whole podcast has been a perfect example of it. Like, I wanted to start a podcast like 5 years ago. Like before being a podcaster was really like the big thing. Like I wanted to do YouTube, and I wanted to just share what I had to share, but there was so much imposter syndrome. There was so much like unworthiness stories and things like that we're saying. And then I went through a transcendental experience after falling out of a tree last December and realized that like I could die in any moment, and I don't want to die not doing the things that I want to do. So fuck it. I'm going to do it.
Yes.
And
yes,
I started the podcast January 1st and have been running with it ever since. And the more and more I'm starting to just release episodes, recognizing like it doesn't always have to be perfect. Like, not everybody, sometimes the internet is shit and things glitch and you've got to cut some things out, or like, you don't necessarily get perfect audio or video. And it is sometimes having to adopt that good enough mentality. to just get it out there, to just keep going. But recognize that the more and more you do the thing, the more and more refined you're going to get, the more and more efficient you're going to get at doing it. And then you also kind of recognize that there is perfection in the imperfection. I have that tattooed on my wrist of perfectius imperfectus, perfectly imperfect, because it's like my constant reminder of like things don't have to be perfect to be perfect.
Dude, that is rad. Yeah, I love that. Great tattoo, and super interesting with the, kind of transcendence experience, near-death experience type thing. This year was a real memento mori year for me as well, but I got that through a totally random ultra marathon I ran a couple days after Thanksgiving. A 40 miler with some friends for 40th birthday that was just like on a whim, and I was not ready or prepared for it, but went way better than I expected and finished it. But that ultimately was my like, dude, what are you doing? Like, what are you waiting for? Like just start doing some of this stuff. Like, so it's really interesting that reminder that, yeah, one day we will die. And, if not now, then when, can be powerful, because that thought used to really scare me. And through a number of reasons and stories and experiences, I've become very not comfortable with it, nor do I want it to happen by any way, shape, or form. But I have an understanding that it will happen, and thus, like, living really matters, and being grateful really matters, and like being appreciative of the people around me really matters, and being, doing the things I want to do with my time really matters, because that's like my life. Like, replace the word life with time. Like, what life is it? It's like 202. Like days, weeks, months, years. Like, that's life. So it's not time. It's life. So how am I spending my life? Like, that really shifted for me even more, honed in for even more focus based on that kind of memento mori experience. So I'm sorry it happened, and I'm glad that it happened for you. Ultimately, now I hope that there's no lingering injuries or anything from that, but it sounds like it was a real catalyst for some change for you. That's very rad.
Yeah, it really was. It was one of those experiences where, just like what you were saying, it kind of was this confrontation of having to face the reality that one day that I will die. And I fell out of the tree, hit a root on the way down, and got a concussion. And that night very much had the sense of like, if I go to sleep tonight, there's a possibility I may not wake up tomorrow. And I had to fully accept that and the reality of that, but then recognize that if I do wake up tomorrow, this is the universe giving me an invitation of what are you going to do now? Recognizing that you are a finite creature with limited time on this planet. So how are you going to make the impact that you feel that you came here to make?
It's a key question, my friend, and I love how you just phrased that. And it's a good reminder. It's a good call to action as well for people, because a lot of times it's easy to fall back into old patterns or habits, or, just doing the things that you're doing and just kind of get, yes, we're here. We're spinning on a rock. This is a thing. It's going to end one day, and we don't know what happens next. So, like, what do I really want to do, and how can I help people? And, like, sometimes we need that jolt, and I hope it comes as maybe a little whisper, a little slap in the face, as opposed to the brake or the Mack truck, but it's good to get those whispers and hear those whispers. And I hear them more often when I'm in nature and when I'm silent and disconnected. And that helps me to hear them as whispers versus slaps or bricks or semi trucks.
Yeah, I really resonate with that, because I also feel the same way. Like, when I'm out in nature, I'm connected. When I am just constantly absorbing information and, doing the busy work that I feel is necessary in order to keep the business going. And of course, there is busy work that is necessary, but there's sometimes busy work that you do that actually stops you from doing the things that you really need to do that will actually catapult your business that much further. But instead, you choose to, I was just on another coaching call, and Matt was saying that it's like you're doing the laundry when you really don't need to be doing the laundry, but you choose to do the laundry because it actually stops you from doing the thing that you really need to do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I do need to do laundry though, but there's also a ton of other things I really should do more. So yeah, great point. Great point. Yeah. Are you a type of person, just curiously, are you the type of person that will like do one project at a time and see it through? Or do you have multiple projects going on?
I always have multiple projects going on. That's the ADHD in me, that there's always many things. And it, of course, presents its own challenges because you're pulled in so many different directions all the time. But if I'm only ever doing one thing, I get bored really easy. So I do need to have multiple things, which is why I have my coaching business, I have the podcast. Content creation is obviously always a thing for any of us that are trying to make an impact in the world, because that's just how people view you anymore, is what does your following look like? Where are you showing up? But also recognizing that we have to make time for ourselves, which is one thing that's always on my plate. I have to make time for my wife and my family, which is always another thing that's on the plate. And learning to find the balance between all of the tasks and recognize that there is just never enough time in any given day to get it all done. So we have to find priority in what it is.
Yeah, and celebrate the wins along the way. This is my list for March. I was gonna get all this stuff done in March, and I got some other things done that weren't on this list. But if you're listening to this, there's probably 12 things there. 3 are crossed off, and that means there's 9 uncrossed. And we're recording this mid-May, so is what it is. Is what it is.
That has been a saying that I have lived by, is it is what it is. Like there's certain things that are within our control, and then there's certain things that are not within our control. And it's like yesterday, my wife texted me, "I'm so sorry you're dealing with the delay in your flight," and things like that. And I'm like, it is what it is. It's not something that's within my control, so I'm not going to stress about it.
And what's interesting about that point is that my list is very much within my control. And if I were to stress about it, even though it's in my control, like it is what it is. Like I just didn't do this stuff, and because I chose to do other stuff instead, and some of it was productive, and I'm sure some of it wasn't. And it's whether it is in your control or not in your control, like it is what it is. So
yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, and it a point I wanted to come back to is how you've made the comment a couple of times of spending time outside with your feet on the ground, shirt off, sun on your back, like recognizing that we all need moments of rest. We all need moments of that connection in nature, that it is totally 100% unsustainable to always be productive.
Yes. I mean, the first lesson I ever learned at University of Richmond in the strength and conditioning department is the best ability is availability, right? And if you're hurt or sick or injured and you can't, play or perform or go to work or be there for your family, then, you're missing the point, right? And so, ultimately, like I had to learn that the hard way. I mean, dude, the tagline of my company when I had my back injury was grind on. And that's what I was doing. I was grinding and had a decade of grinding at that point, and trying to make it as a financial planner, and doing the 7 to 7, with working Saturdays too, and then the networking afterwards 4 days a week, and yada yada yada, like just grinding, and realizing that ultimately not only was I unhappy, but I was unhealthy, And on the way to get out of that was not to really work harder. It was, you know, how I translated the grind on and how I got away from that was the saying, it can be easy. And then I am ease, I am ease, I am ease. And that really helped me. And the question of like, what if this was easy? That applied to like everything for me. And at the time I applied it to my back. This is in 2019. And like, okay, what if this was easy? What if I just like, how would this look if fixing my back was like just easy? And I was like, I'll just walk. And like, that's what I did. Walked like 20,000 steps a day in January, walked 23,000 steps a day in February. I was in San Diego, so that helped. But, you know, ultimately, like, okay, with my business, like, what if this were easy? With my garden, like, what if this were easy? Like, how can I make this simple and not hard and not complicated? And how can it flow to me as opposed to me swimming upriver? And doesn't mean I'm not working hard on things that I enjoy and sometimes otherwise. But ultimately, I'm asking myself different questions, and I'm asking myself good questions and curated questions that I know work for me and for other people. And I'm doing it consistently, and I'm coming back to it and reviewing it. And I'm getting different results than I used to get, you know? And so that's one of the other reasons I love coaching. I love this game so much is like, you know, sometimes I'll come up with an exercise or a client will say something and it'll go a certain way. And I'll be like, dude, that's good. Like, this is good. I'm going to go do this. And I'll get off the call and I'll like ask myself that same question. And I'll be like, this is so helpful to me right now, you know, or whatever's going on. And it's just like, I call it reverse coaching. I get reverse coached sometimes with certain clients, especially. And it's great. You get paid to get coached on your own, you know, just through like coaching that's happening, you know, it's awesome. So staying aware to that and being open to that. And I guess one of the core themes of myself is like, I'm really okay with changing if I need to, or if that's what's required. And I view myself as being adaptable and resilient and gritty, a little gritty, and just being okay with like, okay, like even if it is easy, like it doesn't mean I make things easy per se, or I don't do hard things. Just because I'm looking for better ways to do things doesn't mean that I don't do hard things. I do hard things. You know, I could just choose my hard, you know, so taking that and applying that across all those areas, having ADHD like crazy, you know, you're remarkably still for having ADHD, bro. I'm like I don't know what your feet are doing under here, tapping and whatnot, you know, but I've got this little bouncy chair and I'm trying my damnedest to sit in this thing and just like not move. It is what it is. Again, but I don't know, man, follow your passions and go all the way. And that'll take you really far, and work your stories.
Yeah.
That'll take you farther.
I'm so glad that you touched on that. Making it easy doesn't necessarily mean that you're not doing the hard stuff. And it makes me think of the quote of easy choices lead to a hard life, and hard choices lead to an easy life. So it's that philosophy of like, if you can imagine that it's difficult, you can also imagine that it's easy. But if you can imagine that a hard thing is easy, you can also imagine that an easy thing is hard. And it's just like you said, you choose your hard. You have to pick what you want to do. Like, it's one of the reasons why I love CrossFit so much, is because it's hard. Like, I have yet to find a workout that has been easy. And if it is easy, that means that I'm scaling too much or I'm not pushing enough. But when you're there and everybody else is doing the hard thing together, or their version of hard, which is why you have the various scaled levels and RX and RX plus, and you're still choosing to do something hard. Just like that ultra marathon that you did. Like, I've never done a marathon. I've never done a half marathon. 5K is the furthest that I've ever run in a single stint. And when I did that for the very first time, that was hard. But doing that hard thing now opened my perspective up to, well, if I could do that, maybe I could do a 10K. And if I could do a 10K, then maybe I could do a half marathon. And if I could do a half marathon, maybe I could do a full marathon. And all of a sudden, the more hard things you choose to do, the easier the harder things become.
Absolutely. And that's one of the best things about physical expression and exercise, be it CrossFit, ultra running, regular running, biking, whatever it may be, is like I had a ultra this past weekend on Saturday. It was 32 miles, 70 obstacles. It was a Spartan race down in North Carolina, a couple hours from me. And, I'm going to do about a 3-mile run today. I might run a 5K today, but that is like, now it feels gravy, dude. I was out there for almost it's like 7.5 hours, so it's going to take me like 30, 35 minutes, 40 minutes, maybe worst case scenario to run this thing. Just, go out and have a little jog. Like, it's going to be easy now. And just having that little reframe of comparing events and juxtaposing events, or juxtaposing, things next to one another, and just having that different perspective shift, like you said, and giving yourself the opportunity to realize like what's actually possible. The first ultra I ever did, I was totally unprepared for it. It was back in 2017, and like the whole point was to hurt, because we were doing it for child cancer support, and like raising money for it, and doing it to honor some kids, and so we were doing it to going through it unprepared, right? But in the beginning, when I said I was going to do it, like 3 months prior to it, I knew it was impossible. I was like, there's no freaking way like I can do this. And then through story work, shifted the story, got to the point where at the start line, David Goggins helped too, but neither here nor there, but got to the start line of this thing, and I knew I was going to finish it, whether it was like I was going to crawl and it was going to take me 2 days or not, and there was a lot of factors for that. We had tremendous support, but that made running less miles easier. And it wasn't until the second ultramarathon I ever did, 6 or 7 months ago, the next random 40 miler. I have a history of not really training for these things, but that made me scale up instead of scale down. So instead of making the easy runs, the easy, quote unquote, easy, shorter runs easier, it made me think that the 100 was possible. And it made me go, well, damn, man, like 40 was this, like 60 would be that. And like, yeah. But then like, I'm pretty close to 80. And then if I get to 80, fuck it, I might as well do 100, So then like, what does that look like? Right. And that seemed impossible the day after. I woke up the next day after this thing, after the 40 miler, and it was like 8:15 a.m. And I think we had started at like 8:30. So we're just coming up on 24 hours, and we had perfect weather on Saturday for our little thing that we did, our 40-mile thing that we did, and woke up Sunday morning, it was just pissing rain. It was like 15 degrees colder. It was like 38 degrees, pouring rain. And I looked at my watch, and my first thought was, if I was running 100 miles, I'd still be out there right now. Oh my God. Like, that's some shit. That's crazy. And since then, I've been like working into my head, like, dude, I could do that. Like, we could do that. Come on, Dave. Like, talking to the Dave inside me, like, you could do it, man. Like, I'm a different person trying to convince myself I can do this at some point, but it's cool how those hard things help scale up and scale down. And like, now ice baths are easier, and I don't have a freaking panic attack now after 500 of them. And after doing harder things over time. So it's a testament to, as you said, like that spiral and that growth and that moving forward, man. I couldn't imagine like just staying in one place. I couldn't imagine staying stuck. I can't imagine, actually, because I was doing it, but I couldn't imagine still doing it. Let me put it to you that way. It's like the Matrix, red pill, blue pill. Like, you either, like, once you take the red pill and once you know that like this could happen or this could exist, like it's within the realm of possibility. Like, once you hear the call of the hero's journey, it will torture you until you answer that call. And trials and tribulations be damned. It is the way.
Yeah, it's the whole when you know, and you can't unknow it.
Totally. Totally. I always thought that was bullshit too, especially with women. But I've got I've got the one now, and now I'm like, yeah, dude, it's very clearly like when you know, you know. And so it's just
Yeah.
another
Yeah.
cliche that gets stacked on the right for a reason column, whether you like it or not.
Well, Dave, this has been an absolutely fantastic conversation. If you could leave the listeners with one piece of last advice, what would you offer them to be able to shift their stories, shift their perspective, and lean into their edges a bit?
Yeah, let's get practical just for a quick second, right? Because this stuff is not rocket science. You could do this on your own. I highly recommend doing it with a coach and someone who can ask the right questions and guide you through and be there for support and set the right setting and container for you to go through this and provide support before, during, and after. And the following is the process, okay? You remember something. You got a memory that pops up in your head or a thought that's continually looping or whatever it is, like something happened to you that is hurtful or that whatever. Title it out and write it down. You can do this on paper. You can do this preferably on the computer screen on a Google Doc or something like that, right? Create a title, top of the steps, when mom left, I don't know what to do. Should I leave? Like whatever it is, and then write it out conversationally. That's step one. Okay, that's step one. Step two, quite simply, read out what you have written out loud, however you would normally read it. A lot of us are going to read that very quickly. We're going to want to get through it really, really fast. We may be a little bit disassociated. We may be a little bit disattached. We may be really freaking emotional and fully in it because we probably never wrote down what was in our head and what was really bothering us and put it down on paper. Oftentimes that's enough to get people's emotions and energy flowing a little bit, right? But once you title it and write it down, and once you read it out loud one time, you're going to pause, assess, and read it out loud again. But this time you're going to slow down your rate of speech considerably. And what that does is it's either going to have you highlight how you're physically feeling, and you're going to really get out of your head, or it's going to really bold and underline the words on the page that you were really trying to fly through and didn't want to address in the first place. So once you slow it down to about this rate of speech, that's the third step, and you read it out loud. The last step is to insert a big diaphragmatic, healthy breath in through the nose, long exhale through the mouth. You insert that big breath at every period and comma and exclamation point and question mark that you see. Any piece of punctuation that you see, take a breath. Right? And what that does is it creates even more space, and it automatically pulls us down into that parasympathetic nervous system. If you breathe like that, low and slow and steady, it doesn't matter what you're reading. You do enough of those breaths, you do a paragraph or two worth of that, you will be downshifted physiologically. It's just science. It's the way that it is. So what that allows us to do then, oftentimes, Adam, is for the very first time, they're viewing this experience or this story or this thing that's bothering them or this hurtful, haunted thing, whatever it may be. They're viewing it in a downshifted, downregulated, parasympathetic, rest and relax state, and they're not in the story. It's on a screen in front of them, or it's on the paper in front of them. And boy, is that some powerful shit. It really, really, really is. Because then you're not the story, first and foremost, and now you're slowed down and you're calm and you can see it for what it is, be it accurate or inaccurate, right? And a lot of emotion is going to move through that. I guarantee it. Maybe you get the chills, maybe there's some crying, maybe there's some yawning, go outside, go on a device-free walk for 30 or 45 minutes. Just go clear your mind, come back, and I promise you'll feel way better, right? And again, there's coaches out there who can support you doing that. I'm one of them. There's many others. And quite simply writing something down, reading it out loud a couple times and adding some breath work. I know it's crazy, but it can change your entire outlook on the rest of your life. So that is story work practically for folks who are listening.
Absolutely fantastic, Dave. recently went through a workshop with the coaching program that you're a part of, Enlifted Coaching, and did this exact thing. And I went ahead and volunteered myself and was in front of a bunch of other people on the workshop going through this. And I can tell you, listeners, that he is 100% correct. When I first read the story, I rushed through it because I didn't want to feel the feelings that were coming up based upon what I had written down. But when I slowed it down, and especially when I inserted those breaths, I recognized that I could read it from a place of calm, collected, centered me, and recognize that me in this very moment is not the same me that experienced that story. And because I'm not the same me now as the me that experienced that story and the energy that was behind it no longer had power over me. All of which happened within 5 minutes.
No doubt. It's been a week and a half, a week. How are you feeling now as it relates to that story that you wrote down?
Well, what's interesting is that story that I wrote down had to do with my father. And I saw my dad this last weekend when I went back to Washington State to visit my mom for Mother's Day. And our relationship changed because I changed the energy behind that story. And I was able to recognize that what happened in that instant in my childhood had nothing to do with me, but it had everything to do with what my father was going through at the time. And it allowed me to, instead of having resentment and anger towards him for what happened and for what he said to me, instead have compassion towards him to recognize that, like, fuck, I've been there. I know how he feels, and I'm fucking sorry. I'm sorry I've held on to this emotion for so long that it allowed me to cloud the relationship that I had with him.
Man, I went through a similar experience with my dad in the past year and a half, and that's been a healing journey in and of itself through story work largely. And no, it's a huge relief, man. It really is. It's got to be. And ultimately, like, now being able to build on that new framework of a relationship, and certainly without any details in, like, that's got to be a great feeling to have, and I'm happy for you and proud of you for having that different interaction with that different energy, especially given the fact that it came through story work, and knowing, like, how important that is. That father wound exists in all of us in some capacity, and ultimately we either, like, love our father and thought view him as a hero or a god, or hated our father or didn't know our father, and it's somewhere in but rarely is it in between. It's one of those three. But once we can get past and work through each of one of those scenarios, there's a lot of empathy and perspective, and hopefully love on the other side. And that's what it's all about, man. That's super cool to hear.
Yeah.
And especially that it happened in 5, 10, 15 minutes. Like, I'd love to say it happens every time, and, like, it happens every time. So, hey.
Yeah. And it's a good point that it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to take a tremendously long time to make these shifts.
Correct.
It can happen in a very, very quick period of time. The moment that you change that story is no longer playing on that loop. And when it's no longer playing on that loop, all of a sudden you're living from a completely different perspective. And it's almost like you now become a completely different person.
And think about what plethora of other stories are available to work and shift and have energy and perspective changes have happen. And to then revisit those years down the road, and be a different person, and then work a different angle of that particular story. And man, it's a lot of layers of potential to come off or to add on, however you want to view it. And so, yeah, dude, I'd tell you, keep going with the story work stuff, because it's if it worked once, it's going to keep going. It's going to keep working. It's the same thing, and so,
yeah, absolutely.
Ultimately, that's you're going to be a better you now by doing that. So that makes everybody else better too.
Yeah, exactly. It's those ripples out into the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Impact.
Well, Dave, thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom with us and sharing your story. If the listeners that have been following really resonate with what you had to say and want to work closer with you or find out more about you, where can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can find me in a couple places, mainly on workyourstories.com, or on Instagram at daverobinson.coach. I've also got an in-person retreat business where I do story work in person at beautiful places across the U.S. Last one was in Arizona. We've done one in Minnesota. We've got another one coming up in July of 2023 here in a couple months in Idaho, just outside of Jackson Hole. And that's at bestretreatsever.com. bestretreatsever.com. And I imagine that'll be live and up and running and ready to rock by the time you hit go on this show, because we're like 30 minutes from hitting go on that website. So bestretreatsever.com if you want to learn about this stuff in person.
Fantastic. And as always, I'll have all of that information in the show notes below, so you guys will have easy access to find that on whatever platform that you're listening to this on. So Dave, from myself and the listeners, again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. It's so honored and appreciated.
Thank you, Adam. It's been a pleasure. This has been a really fun conversation, and I imagine we'll be having more fun conversations here soon, through Enlifted or otherwise, man. So please keep in touch. This is a lot of fun. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. 100%. Well, thank you all for listening to another episode of the Embrace and Expand podcast. As always, I greatly appreciate you tuning in, listening, sending your messages. If you feel that this conversation really resonated with you or would resonate with anybody else that you know, feel free to share it on your socials, send it to your friends and family. Every bit that we can help send this out via just past my own personal avenues really helps the message continue to go out into the world and send those ripples out, helping to change each and everybody's lives. So thanks again for being here, and I'll catch you on the next one.